SSCA Easier and Safer Cruising Summit. Tricks, tips, techniques, and solutions to problems. All of us have them. Special ways we have found to make our SSCA cruising life easier and safer. Don't be surprised to hear what seems like contradictory opinions. We purposefully have individual conversations with each speaker or couple so they do not hear what others are saying. They are not arguing with or biased by someone else's opinion. In cruising, as in life, there is no one solution for everyone. So we hope listeners realize these are personal opinions based on individual experience, and they will form their own judgment for their own situation. Welcome to another great episode. A lot of members had something to say about whether traditional navigation and paper still has relevance in the electronic age. Here, from two traditionalists. Find out the pros and cons of using paper charts or a combination of paper and electronics. And know the pitfalls of any chart you are using. In our secondary subject, we ask, is it possible to keep afloat financially while cruising? And what does Pythagoras have to do with securing us to a dock? I'll be having conversations with Eddie Keck of Single Malt, a Swiss circumnavigator and continuing active cruiser. Rudy Sechet of Briny Bug, known for frugal cruising tips and trawler training. Melinda Shell of Seashell. She and her late husband Harry have cruised extensively and have been long-time contributors to the SSCA Bulletin. Melinda is also heading up the SSCA Mentorship Program. Rob Dubin of Ventana, circumnavigator, filmmaker, and the creator of Sailing Quarterly Video Magazine. Stefano P. Viali from Galaxy. Stefano is a boat builder, charterer, and a big advocate of catamarans. Sherry McCampbell of Soggy Paws, former board member and best known for her compendium of invaluable cruising info amassed over her decades of cruising on both monohull and catamaran. Vinnie and Karsten Bruening of Sailing Vessel Capri, Danish members and authors of the book Capri, Sailing Distant Seas. They have been sailing and cruising 5 years and are in the midst of a circumnavigation as well as exploring beyond the beaten path. Bill Cullen of Triumph, whose webinar, thebookofsail.com, was the most attended during the first virtual annual meeting. Classical navigation, celestial and terrestrial, and whether classical navigation is a thing of the past or does it still have value in the 21st century. So what do you think about this, Eddie?
Well, hello, Jackie. Thank you for inviting me to talk about a subject which I like very much. As you probably know already, I do not have a plotter in my cockpit. All what I have in my cockpit is a wind indicator and a depth sounder, and I do have speed and log. But I also do have a really small GPS in the cockpit, which I use. I actually use it very much. But nevertheless, I still consider the classical navigation, that is terrestrial and celestial, as an important tool.
When you say celestial, yes, we understand that. That's using the stars and probably your taking sights with a sextant. When you say terrestrial, us people from the sea, we're kind of curious, what do you mean by terrestrial?
One could say astronomical navigation, which sounds a little bit exaggerated, and terrestrial, that is just the normal coastal navigation using coastal elements like buoys and whatever, and then of course landmarks, and if you have no landmarks you have to find certain landmarks. I consider that as terrestrial navigation.
Well, that's what Luke and I laughingly call dead reckoning, because you may end up dead if you don't reckon correctly.
Well, dead reckoning is of course dead reckoning is fixing a position, a dead reckoning position, on assumption. That is not really by measurement, but you can do terrestrial navigation, of course, with many things: bearings, the depth of the water, distance off perhaps by radar, etc.
Well, that's all we do is traditional, but we definitely feel it's still relevant even in today's age of electronic navigation. It's an excellent fallback skill to have, particularly dead reckoning. I think it's still an advantage, but it must be practiced to maintain a level of confidence. Well, we find two issues with traditional navigation, especially dead reckoning, is one, they don't use it often enough to be confident with it when they do need it. And the second thing is, we've yet to find anybody with a compensated compass or a deviation variation card. And without that, you can't have confidence in your dead reckoning and traditional navigation.
You say that these classical navigations are still valid, and why do you consider them an important tool?
You are organized on a boat with plotters and everything, and you have lightning. And from 1 second to another, your whole system or systems may fail totally. I've had a very small feeling of that once. I didn't have any lightning. I was single-handed in the Dardanelles, that's between the Aegean and the Marmara Sea, when I heard crackling on the VHF radio. And then I looked up to the spreaders and I saw St. Elmo's fire. Immediately I switched off everything I had, radio, all the instrument, and whatever I had, and then I tried to take off the antenna of the VHF, and I got a very serious electrical shock. I was thrown onto the bunk in the fore cabin, had to run back to the cockpit. There was no autopilot and nothing, of course. I had to do it by hand. I was wearing leather gloves because I was afraid to touch the wheel. And the following morning, I checked my instruments. Everything worked except the wind instrument. The wind instrument had gone. Now, if you have a real lightning strike, not just St. Elmo's fire, it's going to look much worse. Now, in a situation like that, you have to be able to navigate with the things which are traditional, which I could even call classical.
It's good advice. If there's always a chance, like especially where we are in Southeast Asia, as we are coming up from Borneo and approaching Singapore, which is notorious for those lightning storms. We saw some lightning storms around, and suddenly there was thunder and a bright light flash all in the same instant, which meant it was pretty much right at the same time we were there. And it wasn't a direct hit, And we did have the GPS go out temporarily on the 12-volt system, but amazingly, it would still operate on the batteries. So we lucked out there. But I think that's it's a good idea for people to be reminded that we don't just look at the chart plotter and see this little boat going on a screen and think that's all we need, and if that screen ever goes off, then what do we do? So I think it's a good idea to keep that in mind.
It's a challenge to take a bearing from an unstable platform like a boat, or identifying an object on an unknown coast, an object which you can't really identify directly. Maybe you have to choose 3 or 4 to be able to finally decide which one you can use. You can't use a headland directly, because you don't know if that headland goes down vertically or if it eases out into the sea and you take wrong bearings. That has to be practiced. And I think that is one of the main problems. And then further, if you do a little bit of, I call it now astronomical navigation, shooting the sun, etc., it is a satisfying experience when you make a good landfall. If it's done by the computer, you don't have that feeling. You only get that feeling when you do it yourself. The same thing is navigating with these elements when you are in areas where there is no maps, no charts, where the charts are not available, or where there are errors because they have not been really updated. In all the areas where there is no shipping, there is no need to produce new charts. One has to deal with old ones. So from that point of view, I would say it still is an important tool.
What kind of necessary instruments do you carry on board?
For taking bearings, I stopped using that old-fashioned handheld compass where you have to half stretch out your arm trying to take a bearing. That's practically impossible on a small boat. I have 2 small bearing compasses which I can press onto my cheek just below the eye, and then I look over the prism and I get a decent bearing. Those compasses are very stable, as a matter of fact. Then I have an electronic bearing compass. I think it's from AutoHel originally. I can't remember. I would have to have a look. You just put the cord around your neck and stretch it so that it is stable. And before I wanted to say, with those compasses you press against your cheek, it's very difficult to stabilize an outstretched arm, but it's not very difficult to stabilize your head. That's very simple, as a matter of fact. Now back to that electronic. You put that cord around your neck, stretch out your arm as far as it goes, and you look over a rifle view, and then press a button. And you can do that 10 times. It will store 10 positions. That's very easy. You just press a few times, and when you think it's okay, and then you go down to your chart table and you have a look at the results, and you will see that most of the bearings are within plus minus 1 degree. If perhaps one is off 5 degrees, so you just don't look at it. You just take those which are nice. And then further, I have a pair of binoculars with an integrated compass, and that's very, very helpful because when you are trying to identify objects with the binoculars, you can see much better, of course, and much closer.
there are people you can hire that will compensate your compass and come up with a compass card, deviation card. There's books they can read to do it. It's not hard. You just have to take the time to get out on your boat and follow the directions. I believe Chapman's has information on how to do it, and there are specific books out there on how to do it. We're fortunate not having any electronics on board. We don't need a deviation or variation card. Our compass reads correct. All we have to do is apply variation if it's not already done so on the, well, it's already done on the charts we use, so we don't have to deal with that aspect of it. But as we do various deliveries and we try to do dead reckoning, I notice a compass that doesn't read correctly or is able to be read correctly is a huge mistake. So everybody just defaults to electronic charting.
Then for astronomical navigation, I have a sextant. And of course, you don't have to do spherical trigonometry anymore with Haversine tables. You don't have to carry those HO tables with the pre-calculated elements. You still have to do some calculation, but the spherical trigonometry is taken away from you. What I have is a couple of laptops, and in both of them I have an astronomical program. And that program also includes the ephemerides, so you don't have to carry a nautical almanac. You have all these data already in the computer, and it's always computed. And then those laptops have integrated a very, very good watch, and I use that as a chronometer. And from time to time, one just checks if it's okay or how much it is off. Of course, when something is going on outside, it is advisable to put one of these laptops, at least one of them, in your oven as a Faraday cage, so that nothing will happen to them. That's about the equipment I have on board.
I think it's great to combine the old-fashioned celestial navigation. We don't have to go all the way back to Horatio Hornblower days. That we can combine the technology. Like, that's great to have on your laptop some celestial navigation programs, so you get your reading off your sextants and then you plug them into your program.
With a sextant, it's very difficult if you are a single-hander to take sights and take the time and all that. But if you are two persons, one can do the observation and the other one just clicks on the computer and fixes the time. And what I normally did, I took a few sites and made a simple drawing, difference in time on one axis and difference in altitude, observed altitude, on the other. And then these points should all be in a line. If they are not in a line, you just discard the one which is off, and then you can make a mean reading of these readings you have, and that goes very quickly. And then another thing what I used to do, as we didn't run our log and depended on what we guessed, it was very difficult to get a decent DR position on passage. But that's not so important. And the self-steering, the wind steering, that doesn't keep a straight course, so it doesn't really matter on the long distance. What I did, when the sun was a beam, or more or less a beam, I took a sight. And then I was able to say, well, I'm left or right of my course line. And when the sun was more or less ahead or astern, I made a sight, and I could say, well, I'm ahead or behind my DR position. Of course, one has to be more precise when you get closer to the land. The metal sextants, they are, of course, very much more stable. You have a decent horizon mirror. You have those circular, semi-reflecting horizon mirrors, which give you a very, very large horizon to take the bearing, so the altitude. And I wouldn't consider that old-fashioned. It is like it. They are the real sextants.
Take it where it's needed nav station. Now that's a very intriguing name. So what is that?
Our philosophy is we want to take our charts where we use them or need to look at them. A building nav station, whether it's at the helm or down below, is limited to using your charts where it's located. So we came up, well, I don't know if we came up with it, but our idea was we took a sheet of plywood, about an 1/8" thick piece of plywood, sized to our charts. Since we use chart books, that would be 17 inches by 22. And then we just lay our chart books on it. We use large bulldog clips to hold it in place if we need to. And we can take that any place we want to use our charts. It also doubles as a writing table if we want to. So whether we go ashore to another boat down below or into the pilot house, we have a surface that we can lay our charts on and work with them. In addition to that, though, you need the tools for basic navigation. You need pencil, eraser, parallel, dividers, scratch paper is helpful, some kind of a timepiece if you're doing dead reckoning, and for people that aren't good at math, a speed, distance, time calculator is helpful. They're rather inexpensive. They're not electronic, although I suppose you can find electronic models. We find the biggest reason people rely on, or it seems to be that they want to go to electronic charting, is they don't have the basic equipment or some foundation for doing chart work easily on their boat. Besides, I'd just like to add, we enjoy doing chart work. We don't find it a chore. We find it enjoyable.
All what I can do now is repeat what I have said already. Practice all these means to be able to use them in a situation where the electronics have failed. And when you practice, compare the results with your GPS position. And if you have a bad result, practice a little bit more until you are nearly to the same position as you get on your GPS. That's one advice. And when you really realize that you can do positions, as you may call it, old-fashioned way, the classical way, then I can assure you, you get a great feeling and a great satisfaction.
Yeah, some people find things like that maybe tedious or something like that. Maybe for those who are newer and were brought up in the electronic age, it might seem daunting to them, but if they took it into like a challenge, like learning some kind of complicated games like Dragons and Dungeons or something, it could be more fun and rewarding to find out that you actually come up with the right answer. Like you say, I think it's probably the wonderful feeling of satisfaction. Here I am, I can do it. So thanks so much for your comments on that, Eddie, and it was great to speak with you about that.
Well, thank you once more for inviting me.
And thank you, Rudy, for the heads up about having a proper deviation card for our compass and the proper tools for chart plotting. Okay, so now you've heard from two members who really love traditional navigation. Let's hear from some other members for their ideas on maybe some compromises.
I was fanatical about charts, paper charts. Now, I know that's gone by the wayside in many respects, but there is no way that I would have ever gone anywhere without paper charts, because I was a navigator. Yes, we had electronic navigation, but if your electronics go out, you're dead in the water. You need to know where you are. And when we were on passages, I marked every hour. Of course, it gave us something to do, too. But every hour, we would mark our Latin long on paper charts. And I have those paper charts where long passages I'd show to people, and they'd say, "Oh, my God, look at you." And you need to know where you are. You need to have the big picture. The problem with electronic navigation is you get the small picture. You know where you are at the moment, but you don't have the big picture. And having paper charts tells you where you are, and it can be a life-saving thing. If you're marking it every hour, and all of a sudden your electronics go out, you know where you are. So that would be one of my first advice. But like I said, a lot of people don't even use paper charts anymore, and they all use just electronic stuff and hope for the best and hope that their electronics won't go out. And when all your electricity goes out because you get hit by lightning and you have no electricity whatsoever, you're in deep doo-doo.
Well, I mean, it's all so much more sophisticated than when we were cruising, but I think the number one thing navigation-wise is just be conservative. Don't ever get yourself on a lee shore. Realize that your GPS is more than happy to take you directly into a reef if that's where you program the waypoint. I think it's important to use multiple sources to check yourself. It's really I remember one entrance in on the coast of Tahiti that there are two entrances through the reef that are both kind of these dog-leg channels, and they look almost identical. They both have like a left turn and a right turn and a left turn, and it would be very easy to mistake one for the other and then put yourself on the reef. And I think the way to avoid that is to get cross-check with more than one source. So yes, it looks like the book, but what else? Am I seeing the church that's supposed to be there in the background? Am I seeing the houses or the schools or whatever? So that would be one thing I would try and do. In terms of what hardware and software and paperwork you carry, when we started cruising, we spent lots and lots of money on paper charts of everywhere we were going that we never ever used. And what we then adopted was a method that worked well for us for the next 10 or 12 years of cruising around the world. Since you're probably going to have a guidebook to wherever you're going, and the guidebook is going to have harbor charts and anchorages and things like that, you don't really need large-scale charts of most of the places you're going. You're probably going to use the guidebook in terms of having a paper backup. The guidebook can be your paper backup. And so what we carried were very small-scale charts that had huge chunks of ocean on it. And that small-scale chart would be enough if my electronic navigation went down. That small-scale chart would be enough for me to find the island. And then the guidebook would be enough for me to find the anchorage after I found the island. So that's what we carried, rather than have to carry really detailed charts of everywhere you sail. People looking at Google Maps to see where they're and what the harbor looks like and all that, that's all newer than when we were cruising.
Yeah, it's amazing, Rob. it is so cool. But sometimes people depend on those a little too much, and they end up in the wrong place anyway.
And I don't have any paper charts either. I used to use paper charts, I don't use paper charts anymore. And the reason is because I have my number one navigational laptop. I have my number two navigational laptop. I have my tablet, which backs up as a number three, and I often use it in the cockpit. And there is normally 2 or 3 telephones on board, also capable of having navigational software installed. And they all have GPSs, so you can't say, I break one GPS. No, because, you go 4 or 5, 6 GPSs on board, so you can find out where you are.
Well, I'm the navigator aboard Soggy Paws, primary navigator anyway. Both Dave and I have a background where we have already learned celestial navigation long before the modern navigation tools came around. And so we do have sections aboard. We set out for our circumnavigation with about a foot-high stack of charts to cover the world. Dave's hands are bigger, more than a foot high. And we had half a world's worth of those charts aboard Soggy Paws when we left the USA. But at that time, we also had a handheld Garmin and a laptop with a chart plotter program on it. And honestly, in 15 years of cruising and 40,000 miles, we have hardly touched the paper chart, and certainly haven't felt the need to break out our sections and stuff. We still do it occasionally just for fun, to remember how to do it, to make sure that if a laser beam shot down all the GPS satellites or something, we could still at least find our way to land. So our first experience in the navigational, the electronic navigation, beyond the little handheld GPS, which, by the way, we navigated all the way across the Pacific with just a handheld Garmin and a laptop with charts on it. We went to Ecuador and found that we didn't have any paper charts of Ecuador, and the charts that we set out to the U.S. didn't have charts of Ecuador. Nobody had charts of Ecuador until we found the MAC-C program and the CM93 worldwide charts. So we stuck with those CM93 charts on the laptop, and that's still what is our primary navigation. So we have 2 built-in GPS chart plotters on our boat, and about 4 or 5 handhelds. You can never have enough GPS. The one thing about whether you're using paper charts or using electronic charts, is you have to realize that the chart quality, the accuracy of the chart, and the detail of the chart varies widely depending on where you are. So your navionics on your iPad that you're using to go up and down the coast in the U.S., which is fantastic, is not necessarily the best option for going offshore. I wouldn't throw it away, of course, but you need to understand that there are places in the world where even the latest and greatest navionics chart set that you download yesterday isn't accurate. And so you need to have the ability to go with some alternative methods to detailed navigation, especially in reefy areas, in less traveled areas where the charts aren't accurate. I can remember the first time we physically plotted our GPS waypoint on the paper chart we had of the Dominican Republic when we first started cruising, and it plotted us like a mile inland because that paper chart was so far off. And I would say, if you bought a brand new paper chart today, it's probably still like that. And it's quite possible that your navionics chart on your iPad that you just downloaded yesterday also is off. So there are places in the world where there's other alternatives that you need to use, including using satellite pictures to get more accurate ideas of charting. I actually did a couple presentations for SSCA about computer navigation and using satellite charts and why and what circumstances you would want to do that. And those are both posted in the SSCA documents library under GAM presentations and on our website. So it'd be worth a spin through there before you set sail with just an iPad and Navionics.
Yeah, okay, thanks, Sherry, for those insights about navigation traditionally and electronically. I think one of the things that you said that was sort of wise is, okay, if you're navigating, making a long passage or something, then we should always be aware or have looked at some chart so that we know that if we get struck by lightning, or as you said, the World War IV happens and all the satellites are blasted out of the sky, we at least can find our way to some piece of land. And once you find the piece of land, then everything seems to be okay, and then you can feel your way around. And then when you want to get really accurate, all these electronics are actually such a blessing nowadays, including the use of Google Earth and Cap2 files and all those fancy things. And people should check out your websites and your information. So thanks for that. Thanks for that.
A French boat, I don't know whether you heard, was lost on a reef in the Red Sea a couple weeks ago. They were using Navionics on their iPad. They had the Google Earth charts on their computer, but were not looking at them. And they hit a reef that wasn't on Navionics and lost the boat. Oh,
wow. Yeah, that's too bad. The thing is that people, we get so used to now looking at electronics and looking at devices that some people, they forget looking out the window and that sort of thing. We're just fascinated to see this boat going on the little chart and then not realizing that sometimes what we're seeing is not reality. And yeah, that's too bad. So thank you, Melinda, Rob, Stefano, and Sherry, for sharing some great ideas, like combining the use of paper charts and guidebooks with our electronics, having tons of backups for the electronics in case something goes out, keeping some of them in the oven or in a Faraday cage situation, noting our position often, and whether using paper or the latest greatest electronic charts, realizing that some may not be very accurate, and having alternatives like traditional and coastal navigation or satellite charts may be the way to go. How do we keep cruising and still keep solvent? That's a balancing act we'd all like to know. Danish sailors Winnie and Karsten, who are in the midst of their circumnavigation, share some of their observations with us.
Well, a lot of people ask us, how much does it cost to go cruising? And it's a very hard question to answer. It's very individual. And I will start to say that all the cruises we have met who are on a budget, none of them has been able to be within the budget. But how much money do you need? That depends on what is included in your budget. Karsten and I, we have a budget, but that means also in our budget we also include our expenses in Denmark. And in Denmark, I mean, we have a health insurance, we have a boat insurance, we have some furnitures on a storage. and we have to pay, of course, for the sat phone, a Danish phone, and so we have some expenses in Denmark. And what we say, if you are cruising, I always compare it when you're going by flight. Are you on monkey class, economy class, or are you on premium class, or are you traveling on first class? That's very different, and cruisers are very, very, very different.
Mm-hmm.
So it definitely depends on how well equipped is your boat. Technically, more things can break down, and it costs a lot of money every time. And what people don't think about is it also depends on where you are sailing and for how long you are sailing. Because we know a lot of European boats that have been crossing the Atlantic, and maybe they are going by boat back to Europe, so they have made the Atlantic loop. And they have done that in 1 year or 2 years. And then you don't have that much expensive. You have some boat repair when you come home, but you don't use that much money when you are cruising. But as soon as you go out in the Pacific, you need more equipment on board, water maker and everything. And now we have been cruising for 5 years, and we have been surprised that we have to change all the battery. We changed the anchor chain after 4 years, and your life raft has to be serviced, and your boat has to get on hard a few times to clean the bottom, and so it all, your budget is very dependent on what class you are traveling on, how well equipped your boat are. Do you have a boat insurance where you have casco insurance or not? Because that's very expensive as soon as you are worldwide, and it depends on for how long you are sailing and where you are sailing. But all the cruises we have met, even they have been in what we call a monkey class, even in the first class sailors, they had a budget, and it has always been more expensive than they expected. And when you need equipment to repair your boat, very often they have to fly it from the States to French Polynesia and wherever you are, and it's very costly. So yeah, it has been a surprise. But we thought about if we should give advice, we would say that if we don't think about expensive people can have at the home country, but only on the boat. So what they are living cost and boat repair, and so we definitely say that they should expect about $3,000 till $3,500 US. We have used average $4,500, and that means also that's all the boats repair and renting car and whatever we have done, and even some flight tickets also.
And that also would include our expenses at home here. So that in that is having a travel insurance, meaning a health insurance plan. That includes paying for our furniture we have in storage here at home, and it also includes our boat insurance. And and monkey class is when he refers to that. I think it's the Danish expression for traveling as absolute cheaply as is possible to do. Some people do that, not many. Winnie and I are probably what you call premium class. We enjoy some of our creature comforts, and we have a boat that has some creature comforts. But budget is the only thing you can almost be certain of is that whatever budget you put down on paper before you leave, you'll blow it somewhere along the line. You will not be able to hang on to it. Stay within the budget.
The day-to-day expenses, like if you're in French Polynesia or somewhere where you can trade for mangoes or, exchange some little things, and you just anchor places instead of going to marinas. The everyday expenses can be pretty cheap, inexpensive, but then when it has something to do with boat parts, whether monkey or first class, if we truly love the cruising life, we have to find a way to become what Luke and I call independently wealthy, meaning juggling our wealth to be able to stay independent. If any of you have great tips or a great story of how you keep on cruising, we'd love to hear from you. Most of us have forgotten all our geometry, but for our quick trick this episode, Bill Cullen will show us how Pythagorean theory can clue us in on how to tie up to the dock and compensate for the tide, and knowing how much line to use. Go ahead, Bill.
Making your dock lines the right length. You go to the marina and you see people tying up their boats, and some of their lines are drooping down in the water and have algae and scum on them. And if you want to know how long to make your dock line, like your bow line, if you have a 3-foot tide, that's A squared. And if you have the length of the dock line is 10 feet, that's B squared. And what you want to know is C squared, the hypotenuse of that, because that's how much slack you need in your line for that 3-foot tide. So you go 3-foot squared is 9, and 10-foot squared is 100. So 109, you take the square root of that, and you find out that for a 3-foot tide, all you need is 1.5 inches of slack in that line.
Whoa. Yeah, you wouldn't think it would be that small. I'm sure all our listeners are as surprised as I am. Now that we're all a little wiser in math and wiser in how little slack we need to compensate for the tide, we come to the end of this episode. We bet you are enjoying the series and have already subscribed to this channel. If you subscribe, that way you'll be notified of future episodes. And you definitely don't want to miss our next episode's crucial main subject, anchors and anchoring. So, until then, stay independently wealthy and keep easily and safely cruising with SSCA. We hope you enjoyed listening to our guests and took away some new ideas for yourselves. If you have something to say about any subject you heard, it's not too late to join in. Be sure to check out the preview of our next episode. Comment and subscribe on SSCA YouTube channel. Share this video on your social media. And join the camaraderie by participating in our coming new episodes. If you are not a member yet, visit ssca.org to get in on the conversation and gain full access to the SSCA Easier and Safer Cruising Summit.